All right, Casey early is joining us. She is a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, and Bob Hilla, trial attorney, still with us right now. Casey, welcome to the show. I mean, you know, listen, this is really an unfortunate and tragic thing. This person is in a police car. Her door is pinned against a wall, so she can't get out. This officer has no badge or identification that's satisfying her. She's saying she's not a police officer. You're not the police. There's no radio. He has no police radio. This is easily, any human being would be thinking that this could be a setup, especially somebody who's in a prostitution world. People are told to watch out for this kind of thing. This is really, really an inartful way, assuming everything was done not in a nefarious way, but clearly we can understand how the victim was concerned, no?
I totally agree, Bob. You know, officers are held to a higher standard. And even if you're working undercover, that does not strip away your responsibility to ensure that if you're working undercover, that you'll be able to identify yourself as such. The prosecutor did an excellent and effective job in the opening statement, basically allowing the jury to go into the state of mind of this victim, because now we know that she was complying, but then she kind of got concerned. And in this industry, it's very risky. So she knew the risk and she wanted help. So again, he should have had all of his credentials ready to identify himself so that she can comply with law enforcement orders.
You know, I want to just ask you just a follow-up, Casey. You know, when we talk about in this industry, and I know that's part of this case, you know, but I don't think that that's part of the issue at all in a lot of ways as well. If any person submits to law enforcement, thinks a person's a law enforcement officer, and they wind up in the custody and control, and that person cannot identify themselves as being a law officer, what's shocking to me as a former prosecutor is that these stings are usually very well coordinated. Everyone's supposed to know where everyone's on the same page. And, you know, in a situation like this, when she's yelling to a bystander, "Can you help me?" and you're not the police, you know what the easiest thing in the world to have done? This is a prostitution case. It's not a murder case. You could have just said, "I'm going to let you out. My bad. I don't have the things that I need. I don't have backup. I don't have a police radio. I don't have any cruisers here. I can understand why you feel the way you do." You know, this is crazy to me. Do you think that the jury is going to be influenced in any extent that any normal human being would have felt that way, but because she's allegedly in the prostitution racket, somehow she should have felt differently or been treated differently?
Well, you know, and I totally agree. I mean, this sting operation just seems sloppy to me. Who sends a text message out? If your credentials are in the trunk, then go ahead and get your credentials. But again, I go back to he should have already had it prepared. And although this is a prostitution sting, that does not mean that she should not have been afforded her constitutional rights, which was, you know, she was in the custody of law enforcement, so they had a duty, and that duty was not to utilize excessive force. And I think that this is what the prosecutor is leading up to, that no matter what her occupation was, bottom line, she was in the care and custody of law enforcement, and they had an obligation not to utilize excessive force in making this arrest.
Yeah, excellent points, Casey. And you know, I just add to real quick that in fact, a prostitute or somebody that's in that business even has a more heightened concern of being attacked, because that is something that routinely happens to them. So even more than the average citizen, they're at even greater risk. This is just really quite unbelievable. All right, so we're just listening to the prosecutor's opening statement in the Mitchell case. Bob Hilla, you know, chilling to me on so many levels. This is a de minimis offense. It is obviously not orchestrated and coordinated. It almost makes me feel it's nefarious, to be honest with you, but let's assume it was an appropriate law enforcement action. He's got the gun underneath, and the prosecutor makes an excellent point. She's trapped in the back, and even if his hand was cut by a knife, the knife is found in the front of the vehicle. But even so, his door was open, his foot was outside the vehicle, he pivots, and then he fires all these rounds into her. I just, for the life of me, can't figure out what this person was thinking when they did that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, you know, and again, this is the state's open. So, you know, what do you have there? At some point,
this escalates. Okay, you hear it start very slowly. There's some legitimate questions. Her perspective seems to be reasonable because he can't really identify with a badge or a walkie-talkie that he's a police officer. No backup shows up. That's a bigger question there for the department. But, you know, at what point, you know, is her reasonable response and speculation, you know, what should the police response be? Now remember, he knows she's got a knife. He doesn't know what other kind of weapon she might have. He's in close quarters in a car. So the real question here is, when this escalates, you know, what should his response have been? And, you know, could he have escaped? The door was open. I think that's what the state's trying to show there. And the fact that there was no attempt to de-escalate once he got out of the vehicle. But again, it's no longer a prostitution issue. It's an assault on a police officer with a potentially deadly weapon and maybe another one. So at that point in time, that is going to be the kind of thing that I think the defense is probably going to focus on.
Yeah, well, Casey, we're obviously switching perspectives from our normal points of view, myself and Bob Hilla, because I look at it a completely different way. These officers are trained on de-escalation. Okay, and this cop did nothing but escalate, in my mind, at least by the prosecutor's opening statement. We'll have to wait to see what the evidence is. But you literally, by the way, let's keep in mind, this is her cell phone recording this. She was in danger enough where she put the cell phone on, and that's the only reason we know this. And in addition to her confronting him about whether he's an officer, he should have known, I do not have the proper identification. I do not have the proper backup. I do not have a proper police radio. I have this woman trapped inside of a vehicle, and at one point she is screaming in fear. I mean, you don't need to be a genius. He's over and over, get off me, get your hands off me. So he's obviously trying to now physically, an appropriate law enforcement action has to be understood by the other person that it is an appropriate law enforcement action. And so it's nothing unusual. She takes a knife out and cuts. Okay, that's a problem, but that does just not justify, in my mind, an officer opening up a door, getting a gun from underneath the seat, pivoting, turning around when she's trapped in the back because she can't get out, I assume because it's a police vehicle, and firing a number of rounds into her. His life was not in danger. He's got to use reasonable force. He's got to confront that force in a way that before you use deadly force, you have to fear that your life or the life of another is in serious bodily injury or death could occur. I don't get this. It's really, it makes me think there's a lot more going on here than we know about in terms of what he was thinking or what his actions were or what his intentions were.
I don't buy anything that this officer was possibly thinking she had other weapons. Even if she did, it goes back to this sloppy investigation and this sloppy sting operation. Because again, like the prosecutor so eloquently laid out in her opening statement, she was in the back seat and at least one of his legs was outside of his vehicle. So then that threat has been diminished. And then you have the fact that, like you said, as long as the prosecutor continues to keep the state of mind of this victim in the forefront, it diminishes the state of mind of this officer because we know that there was some level of fear. And then it just appears that was he trying to make this arrest inside of the police vehicle? It just seems sloppy. It seems unreasonable. And then multiple shots as opposed to one shot. Where was the threat? And she laid it out, and I'm pretty sure the evidence will back up that opening statement where the knife was and where that threat was. So again, I don't see that the threat was sufficient enough. And even if this could have been an assault on a police officer had there not been deadly force, they still have to prove that mens rea, that she knew that he was an officer. And it's so clear that she did not. He's undercover. There's no sign that he's an officer. So it goes back to the state of mind of the victim in this case. And as long as the prosecution continues to keep that in the forefront, I believe that they will secure a conviction.
Bob Hill, I just want to go to one more thing here. There is training on this very issue to ensure that a citizen understands that you are a police officer, and then there's a use of force continuum. And in that use of force continuum, the first level of force that officers are supposed to do is to either be in uniform, or if they can't be because they're undercover, is to demonstrate badge and identification so that there is no confusion with the individual that they're supposed to be submitting to lawful authority. And another thing that gets me on this case, I just want you to talk about, is if you ask me, yes, she cut him, but he's the instigator. He's the initiator. When he doesn't find follow his training, when he listens to somebody who reasonably is concerned in a profession where people are attacked all the time, then I don't think you could just, I love this scenario. I'm a former prosecutor, I'm a cop guy, okay? But it needs to be done the right way here, and you just don't go do something like this with a woman pinned in a vehicle, trapped now on the back seat of that vehicle, where she's screaming. I do not understand. He did not follow his protocols. So do you expect that the defense is going to bring out expert testimony to show all the reasons that the policies and procedures exist, what the training is, how that training wasn't followed, the reason for that training, to say she legitimately feared for her life? Because I love this. I'm sorry to go on a rant. I love this thing when they do something wrong and somebody, quote unquote, resists, because that's what goes into the report, because any normal human person would have resisted under the circumstances they're under. And because they resisted, now we can use deadly force.
Well, and that's the thing the jury's going to have to sift through the evidence here on, because, yeah, you're right. I mean, the defense is going to have to effectively say that he didn't really depart from what the training was. The training's got to be broad because it's got to be situationally reactive.
Specific.
And so, you know, with respect to this officer, they're going to have to filter through this evidence and say, well, look, if he had a leg out of the vehicle, if he had to reach for a gun, then, you know, where is the immediate threat and where is the fear? Because if he's still in control of the situation, then it undercuts this argument that he was in fear. And if there's no fear or there's no immediate threat, then the justification for the shooting is not there, and then he is facing the murder charge.
Yeah, well, I hope, you know, it's shocking to me that this was a hung jury, folks, so this is the second time this case is being tried, and again, I am a law enforcement supporter all the way. Cops have a hard job. They get punched, they get kicked, they get spit on, they get all those things, but you can't get to a point. That knife wound on his hand was not a lethal injury, and you just can't go and fire a number of rounds and kill somebody for something like that. The way that gets resolved is by charging her with aggravated assault or whatever it may need to be, get backup to come in, call your phone, firing rounds for a person trapped in the back of the vehicle. To me, I'm surprised it was a hung jury. Anyway.